Whether you saw the last episode through the leak 2 days early or on HBO when it actually released worldwide, Season 1 of House of the Dragon has come to a close, spanning 10 episodes in total. Let's talk about what worked and what didn't work in this season. Right off the bat, I'm pleased to say that House of the Dragon's first season was indeed a success. All previous fears of Game of Thrones Season 8 fuckery have been alleviated, as it seems like the writers have been much more level-headed and capable. Despite what I feel was an inherently more difficult adaptation, because of many time skips, the writers still managed to keep things both interesting and entertaining. I've read that in some spots they even deviated from the source material, and given that mostly none of the series' events seemed off to me or particularly terrible, it appears that the showrunners also managed to put in their own touches without absolutely trashing the characters and the plot as our old friends Dave and Dan did. Since we've mentioned the time skips, let's focus on that a bit more. The series spends the first few episodes hopping through time, taking us from Rhaenyra and Alicent's childhoods to their adulthoods and through the rule of King Viserys. Things finally stabilize in episode 8. To be frank, while I believe that the time jumps were dealt with decently, I didn't feel like I exactly grew with the characters or really watched them grow. I saw the end results of that growth and could clearly see the path that led to it, but I didn't really walk upon it with them, if that makes sense. But I suppose that's only natural for a show dealing with so many characters. For the most part, the actors that were constantly brought in as replacements for the younger versions were physically similar and did a good part in effectively representing their younger selves. No one in particular struck me as wildly different or jarring, except maybe Laenor. The younger version, both in physicality and personality, seemed much more serious, more elegant, and much better put together. Adult Laenor seemed kinda goofy, and just like very inactive and complacent, at least in comparison to his younger self. On the other hand, it was a little bit hard for me to swallow how the other characters changed, who had been adults from the start. Because mostly they didn't. People like Daemon and Kristen, like Otto, Rhaenys, and Corlys barely grew a wrinkle in what was more than 20 years worth of past time. And while I could maybe swallow that for Daemon and Kristen, who maybe have great Chad genes or something, it's much more unbelievable for people who were already old, most notably Rhaenys, Corlys, and Otto. And we can't forget the most egregious example of this, which is Lord Westerling, the commander of the Kingsguard. That motherfucker started out old as fuck and ended old as fuck. Spent the entirety of the series old as fuck. You're badass, but old as fuck. I have no idea how old they're supposed to be at present, but boy are they spry for their ages. And this is very particularly bothersome as the whole show is set in a medieval kind of setting, lacking both magic and modern technology. So it's not wild to assume that death lurks around every corner and that life expectancy isn't all that high. But still, these people age like they have the best skincare routine known to humanity. Viserys is the only one we see change, and quite drastically. But that's meant to highlight how much the Iron Throne itself had taken away from him and destroyed him. But yeah, that was excellently done, with a very realistic appearance and a very convincing performance. And as I said, while the time jumps were decently executed for what they were, I think the show would have benefited from slowing down considerably. To my understanding, the first season rushed to get us into the Dance of the Dragons, which is the Targaryen Civil War. However, I don't think it needed to. The events of the first 7 episodes have enough tension and drama to last 2 seasons. The showrunners could have easily chosen to explore this over the time skips instead of just jumping into the future. We could have seen more of the characters and their comings and goings, their growth and their interactions with those around them, and I think that would have given us the sense of accompanying them along their journey of growth rather than just witnessing its temporary conclusion. It could have also managed to explore more character-focused moments as opposed to just the overarching war plot. Episode 7, for instance, concluded with so much being done that could have benefited greatly from further exploration. The development of Rhaenyra and Daemon's relationship now that Rhaenyra was an adult, the death of Laenor and its implications, the fighting between the children and the matter of Vhagar, Alicent's angry outburst against Rhaenyra, they all built an incredible amount of suspense and opportunities for character exploration and development, which would have been interesting to see develop even further. But instead, we jump once again, this time 6 years into the future, and all that fire sizzles out. And again, I'm not saying it's terrible or it doesn't work, it's fine. and it does. But I feel like it would have been much greater if the showrunners had had the confidence to halt the progress of the overarching plot to linger on these character moments. I feel like in many places this rush resulted in the characters doing some uncharacteristic things. Rhaenys, for instance. I love her character, this serious but clever, badass, should-be queen warrior, and to a degree I've grown to like rooting for her. But the issue is that it feels like the time skips have done much to dull her character, or at least muddy it slightly. The season's finale shows us Corlys and Rhaenys pledging for Rhaenyra, after Rhaenys had convinced Corlys. And while I get it, queen stands queen and all, and it makes sense given the slights Alicent and the Greens have done as of late, it's also still odd for so many reasons. Rhaenys and Corlys are both confusing in whether they care about the obvious fact that Rhaenyra's children are not of Velaryon blood, but are rather bastards. They were closer to them before, which made sense given that this knowledge was not as abundantly clear, but now that it is, why do they still have no issue? One could argue it's because they knew Laenor was gay, but still, I just don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering some things, but to me it seemed like their stance has been mostly undetermined or very flippity-floppity. But the biggest issue I had with Rhaenys' decision in episode 10 was the greater problem of them disregarding Rhaenyra's clear involvement in their son's death. The least they could have done before pledging for her was at least stress this particular matter a bit more, or like attempt to get some answers somehow. Another character I took issue with was Daemon. I know he's supposed to be a volatile, chaotic bad boy, but at this point he's starting to come off a little messy as opposed to intentionally unpredictable. He seems to fluctuate greatly in his desire to rule or not rule. One second he wants Viserys' crown, the next he just wants his approval, the next he doesn't care anymore, until he does and is power hungry once again. I guess it could all be reasonably justified, up until he chokes Rhaenyra in the finale. It was an uncharacteristic outburst in the moment, or at least one that was not maybe properly set up, at least to me. It expressed his clear doubts and dislike towards Viserys' rule, which is a well-established fact, but it also showed him spit on every step he took towards what seemed like maturity in the past 20 years. He seemed to have gotten over his desire to rule and was rather discontent with being caught up in the drama and politics of the realm, as we saw in his time overseas. And then in this episode, it seemed like he truly wished to serve Rhaenyra, though in his own disobedient bad boy ways. But then he does this at the end and I just don't know. It just seems like he's bouncing all over the place, and like the writers can't decide whether they want him to be good or bad. And I feel like this inconsistency, at least in my eyes, traces its roots back to the many time jumps. The finale in general could have been better. It wasn't bad by any means, but what with the pacing, it felt like we didn't have enough time to settle into the current period. The great time leaps just recently stopped. We've barely gotten accustomed to this new era, this final era of sorts, and then the series is just over. Episode 9 focused on the Greens, Alicent and Otto, and the coronation of Aegon. It showed their perspective of the situation and their intention of dealing with it. Episode 10 did the same for the Blacks, focusing on Rhaenyra as queen. In my opinion, things needed one more episode that combined both. It would have been a more satisfying conclusion to see them clash at least a little bit, or in a sense get a more neutral perspective, such as in previous episodes, as opposed to a limited view of one party. And you could say that the Lucerys versus Aemon dragon fight was that, but it wasn't totally enough. I needed something a bit more large scale, and I don't mean in a big dragon fight small dragon way, I mean in a character way. So yeah, I feel like an extra episode could have gotten us better set in this time period and given us more to work with until the next season comes. It's obviously going to be a long wait, which is why I needed something beefy, or at least beefier. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like the first seasons of Game of Thrones just set expectations that were just simply too high. So now I'm watching House of the Dragon and definitely enjoying it, but I'm just looking for even more tension, even more suspense, more thrilling cliffhangers, and I don't think episode 10 did a good enough job of delivering that. But yeah, on every other level the show is great, and I'm absolutely in love with it. The things that work really work. The cinematography is beautiful, and so are the costumes, the locations, and practically everything else. The music never misses, and the acting is superb. Like, seriously. Shows like these, with such a huge focus on character, are very reliant on good acting, and here it does not fail. Everyone's eyes always seem to be communicating so much in times where words cannot, and it feeds into all this inter-character drama. So yeah, in conclusion, if you haven't seen House of the Dragon, go do so. Shit is great, and I'm hoping it'll get even greater as the showrunners better find their stride. I expect great things for the future. It's gonna be tough waiting, but at least now I can finally watch Rings of Power and figure out if it's as bad as people have made it out to be. Anyways, if you've enjoyed the video and want to see more reviews and shit, please like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it infinitely. Take care and I'll hopefully see you soon. Goodbye.